October 1967, two men on horseback rode into a remote stretch of Bluff Creek in Northern California. They carried a rented 16mm camera in the hopes of finding something most people dismissed as folklore. What they filmed over the next 59.5 seconds became one of the most analyzed pieces of footage ever recorded. Nearly 60 years later, scientists, special effects artists, anthropologists, and skeptics are still arguing about what appears in those 954 frames. No one has proved it was Bigfoot. No one has conclusively proved it was a hoax either. And that is exactly why the Patterson-Gimlin film refuses to disappear. To understand why, we have to go back to the morning of October 20th, 1967. Roger Patterson wasn't a scientist. He was a rodeo rider from Washington. He had become fascinated by reports of a giant ape-like creature said to roam the forests of the Pacific Northwest. He had even published his own book on the subject before ever picking up a camera. His companion, Bob Gimlin, was different. A rancher and experienced horseman, Gimlin has often described himself as far less invested in the legend. He joined Patterson partly because he knew the wilderness, also partly because he was willing to help a friend on another expedition. According to both men, they were riding through Bluff Creek. They rounded a bend and spotted a large, hair-covered figure near a dry creek bed. Patterson's horse reared. He jumped off. He grabbed the rented Kodak camera from his saddlebag and began filming as he ran toward the figure. The footage lasts just under 1 minute. It shows a broad-shouldered figure walking away from the camera. Before disappearing, it briefly turns its head toward the lens. That moment, known simply as frame 352, has become one of the most recognizable images in the history of cryptozoology. From the beginning, people split into two camps. Believers saw the clearest evidence ever captured of an unknown primate. Skeptics saw a man wearing a costume. Nearly 6 decades later, neither side has managed to completely convince the other. Part of the reason is that the film has been examined far more seriously than most people realize. It has been studied frame by frame, stabilized, enlarged, digitally restored, compared with human movement, compared with great apes, compared with costume performances. Every generation of imaging technology seems to revisit the same question: what, exactly, is walking through Bluff Creek? Supporters of the film point to details they argue would have been extraordinarily difficult to fake in 1967. One of the most prominent advocates is Bill Munns, a Hollywood special effects artist with decades of experience building creature suits. After years studying the footage, Munns argued that the figure showed anatomical features, ones that go beyond what costume technology of the late 1960s could realistically achieve. He pointed to what he interpreted as muscle movement beneath the fur, body proportions unlike an average human, and natural shifts in weight as the figure walks. Anthropologist Jeffrey Meldrum reached similar conclusions from a different direction. Rather than focusing only on the film itself, Meldrum spent years studying the footprint casts reportedly taken at the site shortly after the encounter. He argued that some of the prints showed features like a flexible midfoot, one that would be unusual to reproduce convincingly, especially if someone had simply stamped fake footprints into the ground. For believers, these observations strengthen the case that Patterson and Gimlin captured something genuinely unusual. But none of them prove Bigfoot exists, and that distinction is important, because for every argument supporting the film's authenticity, skeptics have offered another pointing in the opposite direction. Roger Patterson's own reputation has long been part of that debate. Patterson had already spent years promoting the Bigfoot legend before the famous expedition. He had published a book on the subject and was working toward a documentary. Critics have also pointed to accounts collected by investigator Greg Long. He reported that some people who knew Patterson described him as dishonest or willing to embellish stories. Whether those character assessments are fair remains debated, but they have long formed part of the skeptical case against the film. If anyone stood to benefit from extraordinary footage, wouldn't it have been Roger Patterson? That question has followed the film for nearly 6 decades, with no answers. One of the most well-known skeptical explanations came from Bob Heironimus. He publicly claimed in the late 1990s that he was the man inside the suit. According to his account, Patterson paid him to wear a homemade costume, then walk across Bluff Creek while the camera rolled. If true, it would solve one of cryptozoology's longest-running mysteries, but his claim has never settled the debate. Critics of Heironimus point out that no original costume has ever been produced. His account has also been challenged over the years. Supporters of the film argue that parts of his story conflict with other evidence surrounding the filming. To skeptics, however, his testimony remains an important piece of the puzzle, even if it is not universally accepted. Other researchers have focused less on witnesses and more on probability. Anthropologist David Daegling has argued that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While he acknowledges the film's cultural significance, he maintains that it falls short of proving an unknown species exists. For Daegling and many other skeptics, a convincing costume remains a simpler explanation, at least better than a giant undiscovered primate living undetected across North America. That skepticism is difficult to dismiss. After all, despite decades of reported sightings, no confirmed body, skeleton, or DNA evidence has established the existence of Bigfoot. Modern trail cameras, environmental DNA sampling, and wildlife surveys have transformed how scientists study remote ecosystems. But none has produced conclusive evidence of a large, unknown ape. Those are serious questions any honest examination has to acknowledge. And yet, the Patterson-Gimlin film refuses to fit neatly into either camp. Believers continue to argue that no recreation has convincingly matched the figure's proportions, gait, and apparent anatomy. Skeptics counter that unusual footage is not the same as proof of an unknown animal. Both positions have strengths. Both leave unanswered questions. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is not the film itself, but Bob Gimlin. Roger Patterson died in 1972, just 5 years after filming the footage. He maintained until his death that what he recorded was genuine. Gimlin, now in his 90s, has spent decades answering the same questions in interviews, documentaries, and public appearances. Through all of it, his central account has remained consistent. That consistency does not prove he was right. People can sincerely believe something they experienced without interpreting it correctly. But it also explains why claims that Gimlin finally confessed continue to spread online despite having no factual basis. He has never publicly admitted the film was a hoax, nor has he recanted his account of what happened at Bluff Creek. In many ways, that is what keeps the debate alive, not because the mystery has been solved, but because it hasn't. Nearly 60 years after those 59.5 seconds were captured, the Patterson-Gimlin film occupies a unique place in popular culture. It has survived advances in film restoration. It has survived countless documentaries. It has survived arguments from believers and skeptics alike, not because either side has won the debate, but because neither has completely closed it. Maybe one day, new evidence will emerge that finally tips the balance and lets us know the truth. Perhaps an overlooked document, a forgotten photograph, or advances in forensic analysis will reveal something previous generations missed. Or perhaps the answer has already been sitting inside those 954 frames all along, waiting for someone to interpret them correctly. Until then, the Patterson-Gimlin film remains exactly what it has been since October 20th, 1967. 59.5 seconds of footage, a figure walking through Bluff Creek, a single glance back toward the camera, and one of the few mysteries where almost everyone agrees on the evidence, but not on what the evidence actually shows.